Hello and welcome along to the Weather Studio Live. Happy New Year. I'm Alex Deakin.
I'm Aidan McGivern. We're here once again, live 1 o'clock here in Exeter, the Met Office headquarters, broadcasting the latest weather and climate news straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. Please do send in your comments and questions. We'd like to hear from you. Claire is right next to me, eager to get started on some questions. And actually, we've already had a really interesting question. Liam Eslick on YouTube. I'm studying MSc, Applied Meteorology and Climatology at Birmingham University. Good choice, Liam.
Excellent university.
I studied that course as well. And he has asked, what would be a good dissertation topic for me to study? And we've been chatting about this, haven't we? There've been a few ideas
came up with
thrown
a good
about.
idea. What did you suggest, Claire?
Well, the Indian Ocean dipole, which we'll be talking about in a moment, and obviously has had a huge effect on weather in Australia as well as in Africa as well. It's the change in temperature, the difference in temperature across the Indian Ocean close to the African coast to Australia, and it's been very extreme this year. It's been a positive, but there are knock-on effects elsewhere around the world. In fact, there's a recent paper that talks about how it does affect the UK weather as well. So we'll be talking about that, particularly what's happening in Australia. Yeah, do send your questions and comments in. And yeah, a Masters in Weather and Climate's fantastic. It is the big topic of the decade.
Yeah, certainly is. So yeah, good luck with that, Liam.
Yes, and speaking of decades, we'll be touching on the decadal figures that came out last week, the Met Office press release about the figures, the warm decade, the second warmest decade on record. We're talking about that a little bit later on, but first of all, we're going to be talking about the big story, of course, Australia, what's going on in Australia. We'll also be touching on the UK's weather, because it's pretty uncertain over the next couple of days, actually unusually uncertain.
It's this part of the world here, There's a breeding ground in here for low pressure systems, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen here this evening and how it will impact our weather later tomorrow and into Thursday. So we'll be taking a look at that part of the world and the differences in computer models, what they're all saying for what's going to take place here in the next 24 hours.
Really quite interesting times weather-wise, close to the UK, but also obviously very serious conditions down under. We've seen the terrible pictures coming out from Australia with the wildfires that have just been ongoing throughout December, and conditions, well, did seem to improve a little bit earlier this week. There was a little bit of rain around in the affected areas, parts of New South Wales and Victoria, but only a little bit. So let's take a look at the forecast for the next few days. A few showers around today in this part of the world, mostly over southern Queensland, 1 or 2 over New South Wales. They fade away, and then as we go through the rest of this week, it isn't great news actually for the wildfire situation. It remains dry, and we're going to see the heat building once more day on day. Temperatures are set to rise over the next few days.
Yeah, let's take a look at the heat first of all, because it looks like with that heat building, it's towards the end of the week that it peaks. So these red colours here, bear in mind that the time zones here are slightly different. This is the UK time. So we're looking at overnight temperatures really for UK overnight. And then you can see the reds intensifying through the start of Thursday and into Friday. So we're looking at the next 12 hours really. Around here. Mid-40s once again returning, and again some local records under threat from that heat as it builds. So this is probably the peak of the heat right here, but you can see a change coming in.
Yeah, I'm going to highlight that line there.
Yeah,
and that's a cold front which is coming in.
Quite well marked cold front there. And actually, if we rewind, that has its origins in a completely different part of Australia. Rewind to the present time, and there's a tropical cyclone towards the north, Tropical Cyclone Blake, expected to bring a lot of rainfall in the north, and then that moves through Western Australia.
South, and this cold front comes up, and it may just draw out some of that moisture from the tropical cyclone as it moves through. But this is again Wednesday, Thursday, all this development up here. So lots of rain actually in northern parts of Western Australia, where there have been some fires, so this is good news for them. Then that cold front comes in, and it may just bring down a little bit of moisture, but look, as it comes across South Australia, there's a fair bit of rain on it on Thursday, but it's ahead of it really where that heat will be building through New South Wales and Victoria. Again, temperatures expected to peak on Friday ahead of this cold front. And also what this cold front is going to do, notice the isobars close together, that means the winds will be picking up as well. So the winds will steadily be increasing. So Friday looks like a really bad day, especially for New South Wales. Strong winds and incredibly high temperatures, as Aidan said, over 40 degrees Celsius. And the really bad news is that this cold front just weakens as it comes across. So it's not going to bring much rain.
You need a lot of rain. You need hundreds of millimetres to bring widespread relief, and really a small amount of rain is more bad news than good news.
It can be, yeah. Well, it's a really interesting tweet actually from a lady called Ginger Z. You might get it from the name, actually, but she's an American meteorologist and presenter. Actually, she's over reporting for the United States, but over with the New South Wales Fire Department at the moment. She sent a really interesting tweet. She's a really interesting follow, actually. If you should follow her on Twitter. She reports all around the world, but particularly the US when there's hurricanes and stuff. But she's over in Australia at the moment. She tweeted this morning how the fire department there weren't that happy about the rain that fell over recent days because it was so light, and actually it was more of a hindrance to them because it meant they couldn't do their organised fire. They couldn't do their their fire breaks, where they set fire deliberately to parts of land to try and stop the spread of fire. It hindered them more than actually helped them. So that was really interesting. So again, this patchy rain may not be good news for them, but it does then, once that cold front's gone through, it does then finally cool down across New South Wales as we go into the weekend. So perhaps better news into the weekend. The winds will ease off a little bit and temperatures will finally drop down again. But the next few days do look pretty bad across parts of New South Wales.
Yes. And one consequence of the fires are that they can generate their own local weather systems, something that you may have heard about recently called flammagenitus clouds now, or pyrocumulus clouds. This person, Joe Benham, who on Twitter took this picture from an aeroplane, New South Wales, and just showed the tops of some of these pyrocumulus or flammagenitus clouds.
You can see they look like proper cumulus, don't they? The proper cauliflower look. They just have a slightly greyer hue to them, because of the smoke particles within them.
Enormous things, really, and you can see them you can pick out them on the satellite image as well. So you've got all this grey smoke plume coming out of Australia, but then the white tops there are the tops of these pyrocumulus or pyrocumulonimbus in some cases clouds, and they can sometimes help put out some fire because of the rainfall, but more often than not, particularly if they happen in an area where it's not particularly humid, then they can cause further problems.
This is like a life cycle of these flammagenitus clouds. There's a fire at the source. That's the source of the heat. The air rises and it turns. Obviously, there's a lot of smoke, but also as it rises, it cools, it condenses, and if there's enough moisture, it does form a cloud in itself, which then creates the rain, which then also creates a downburst, and that can then also fan the flame. So fires often generate their own weather. They also generate their own wind. So the rain can be helpful, but also you've got the gusty winds that they generate, and also the lightning. Lightning sparks come down, and they can even spark new fires as well. So it's a really mixed bag when you see these. Flammagenitus is the official name from the WMO, but locally they're known as pyrocumulus. They used to be all called pyrocumulus, but the WMO...
Pyro for fire, and then cumulus or cumulonimbus are the clouds that they create.
To be consistent with the Latin, WMO went to flammagenitus because pyro is Greek. So that's why. So the WMO, the Cloud Atlas WMO is really interesting, actually, especially if you're a cloud geek like I am. But they updated it last year or the year before, so now the official term is flammagenitus, but you will hear meteorologists call them pyrocumulus because that's what they're called.
Another thing that they can do is cause quite unpredictable winds at the surface, particularly if they collapse and send these downdrafts and updrafts into a sort of spiral, and then you get these winds going in all sorts of different directions at the surface, which can make the predictability of fires at the surface much, much worse. So, yeah, pyrocumulus or flammagenitus.
Seen far too many of them recently, sadly. Any questions coming in, Claire?
Yes, two types of question regarding UK weather over the next few days. Thank you for your comments and your questions regarding wind and then whether the weather is going to get colder with the chance of snow. First of all, let's address the wind. At the moment, there are wind warnings out across the UK, Western Scotland, South East Scotland and Northern England away from the northwest. And in fact, we have had a message from Jonathan Edmondson saying how windy is it going to get in the northeast. I presume you're talking northeast England. And the answer is, well, at the moment, gusts could reach 60 miles an hour, perhaps even higher than that. They have done through the morning. The peak across border regions was around lunchtime today, where we could see winds up to 70 miles an hour, and they're incredibly gusty as well. And that same goes for West Yorkshire as well. Leeds is actually in the wind zone area. It's going to be windy all afternoon into evening time. So that's the wind. It's the mildest day of the week. It turns a lot colder tomorrow. And with that, yes, we do talk about snow sometimes. In fact, the snow line is likely to fall as we head into evening and overnight across Scotland, down to around 300 metres. So the showers which come in tomorrow could turn to snow. However, there's some uncertainty about the next system or next two systems coming in from the southwest. And as the mild air clashes with the colder air to the north, there is always the chance of some hill snow. The boys will be talking more about that. But before I go, nice question in from Yehar Yibhey. I don't know whether I've pronounced that correctly, but
sounded correct.
Yeah,
I was looking at that question thinking, I don't want to pronounce that, and I'm glad you
on YouTube, this time 10 years ago, the whole of the country was covered in snow. Am I correct? Well, actually, it leads in very nicely to what we're talking about in terms of stats for the last 2 decades, doesn't it?
Actually, yeah, it does, because 2010 was a particularly cold year, which influenced the decadal temperature overall as well. Yeah, we'll have more on that in a moment, to talk about the decadal stats. But yes, you're quite right. This day, 10 years ago, UK was covered in snow, a complete whiteout. Some fascinating pictures of satellite imagery, again, available on Twitter. We've got a bit of a whiteout across the UK.
Yeah, for a different reason.
But for a very different reason. The white you can see here is cloud.
So this was early this morning. You can see the cloud rolling in from the Atlantic and a strengthening wind across the country as well. And what we've got now is gales across northwestern areas and some heavy rainfall. So let's play that forward and just show you where the rainfall is over the next 24 hours, really. This is the end of Tuesday now. Zoom in. The very wet weather that we started the day with across Scotland, Northern Ireland, it's going to peter out overnight. It's going to sink south, and essentially it's just dribs and drabs of rainfall. But it stays windy right the way through to the end of the evening, essentially. And then clearing skies eventually, and colder air tucking in. Someone mentioned that, actually, let's put on the warning.
Yeah, it showed today's warning because northern Scotland's getting a real hammering, aren't they? But also in here, and that's to do with lee gusts. That's to do with the mountains affecting the way the wind works. It hits the mountains, bounces down the other side, and creates some very strong gusts. And the A1 would be very nice for high-sided vehicles through the rest of today. In particular, there's a bit of an explainer on lee gusts if you're interested. Actually, on our sister channel on YouTube, learn about weather. You can find out about lee gusts on that.
Yeah, so that goes out till 9 o'clock. Winds eventually ease down overnight, and skies clear in the north with colder air coming back in. And Claire mentioned the wintry showers. There we are. We've got some colder air coming its way into northern parts of Britain. Enough of a breeze to prevent a widespread frost or mist and fog. But let's have a look. You can see some of those sleet and snow showers over the Scottish mountains, can't you? Rain at lower levels for the start of Wednesday. Cloud cover further south, but essentially Wednesday is a fine morning for many places. Plenty of bright weather across England, Wales, southern eastern Scotland, Northern Ireland. Showers coming into northern and western Scotland through the day, continuing to fall as sleet and snow over the hills. But it's a decent day. It is a decent
day, and we're pretty happy that tomorrow will be a decent day. We're confident in the forecast that most parts of tomorrow will have some sunshine, be fine, be dry, a bit colder than today, but slightly lighter winds. It's tomorrow night, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of uncertainty, an unusual amount of uncertainty about the forecast of specifically a low pressure that's developing and coming in just off the screen there. And it's, as I say, it's unusually to be this uncertain, this close, this kind of time range. We're talking 36 hours away, and there is a lot of uncertainty.
I was actually having a look at a measure of uncertainty that we use in our forecast. There's a diagram that we've got internally that shows how uncertain or how certain, how much confidence we've got in the forecast. And essentially tomorrow night is in the bottom 10th percentile. So it's in the bottom 1 out of 10 for uncertainties at this time range. After that, we go up to the top 1 in 10 certainty for the weekend. So it's one of those situations where we've got more confidence for the weather Friday, Saturday, Sunday, start of next week, than we have actually for tomorrow night and Thursday.
Why is that? Why is people saying, wow, how can you know what the weather's doing the weekend but not know what the weather's doing, or not be that confident about the weather over the next 48 hours? And it's all to do with what's going on out in the Atlantic.
It is, yes. So let's just show you what's going on in the Atlantic. We've got this very powerful jet stream, which is deepening areas of low pressure, sending them our way. Jet stream essentially acts like, imagine you've got a spinning top and you blow on it. If you blow on it in precisely the right direction, the right speed, you'll spin up that spinning top, you'll make it go faster. But if you're just slightly off with your blowing action, it won't spin up, it will disappear, it will stop spinning. And that's what the jet stream does with these areas of low pressure in the Atlantic. So it's getting exactly the right position and direction for the jet stream to spin up these areas of low pressure. And out in the Atlantic at the moment, actually, if we rewind to the present time, well, then it's in this region. There's the satellite. It's in this region where there are several very small areas of low pressure in a part of the world where we've got cold air coming in here and meeting warm air here. And now where we've got these very small areas of low pressure, in some computer models, they spin up one area of low pressure and send it our way. In other computer models, they spin up an entirely different area of low pressure, which is in a similar location. So that's the kind of...
that's why there's uncertainty. It's an unusual situation, a very active jet stream, and in this little breeding ground, there's a few areas that could develop, and just a slight subtle difference in the strength of the jet stream and the position of the low, or the exact low that it picks up, 36 hours later we'll have a marked impact on where it is, because it's a developmental situation, because it's actually turning into potentially quite a deep area of low pressure. There's a lot of uncertainty.
The question is, how do we know which of the computer models to trust?
Yeah.
When they're saying quite different things for tomorrow night. One way is that we look at what they're saying for the time being, what they were saying for this morning, and seeing from the satellite images which one was closest. And this is the actual satellite image showing what we call water vapor, so it's a certain type of image from space. And what we're looking at here is the circled area, and that's what's called an upper trough, but it's essentially a dip in the jet stream where you get these developmental areas for areas of low pressure, a breeding ground for areas of low pressure. So the question is that dip in the jet stream predicted by the computer models? And the one that came closest, it's not spot on, but the one that came closest was the UK computer model. Doesn't always, but in this instance it did, and it showed the closest match for that dip in the jet stream. But other computer models had, for example, the European computer model had that dip in the jet stream just a little bit further back, and that very small difference escalates downstream in the next 24 hours. And it's tonight that it's expected to deepen these lows and send them our way. And so it's really only this evening that we'll start to see which area of low pressure will be deepened and sent across the Atlantic, and whether it's the UK that has it right.
This process is called verification, basically, and the chief forecaster is Andy Page upstairs today. He looks at these when he first comes on shift in the morning. He looks at which computer models are doing best for the projections, but also, most importantly, how it's doing right now. Which model can he trust the most, because which is the most accurate with the situation right now? It's a common feature in meteorology, and it's what the chief meteorologists do day in, day out.
Yeah, so I mentioned that it's in this area, this dip of the jet stream, where it's the breeding ground. And watch what happens. So you can't see much at the moment. They're very small areas of low pressure. There's one here, there's one here. Now, the European model picks up one out here and ignores the one here. But the UK model, watch what happens with the low pressure that's in there. If I play it forward, it picks it up and it rapidly deepens it during Wednesday, and it carries it towards the UK. And there it is. There's the low pressure.
Look at the number of isobars on that. That's why there's a wind warning out, because it does have the potential to cause some disruption with the strength of the wind. But it's only a yellow warning at the moment, because partly because of the uncertainty. we'll know more, as Aidan says, by the end of today. But it is unusual to be this uncertain. This is the kind of uncertainty you'd expect maybe at day 4, day 5, but to be only 36 hours away, this is particularly unusual.
Yeah, in fact, if we take off the jet stream, then you can see the differences in those two main computer models. So these are the two different scenarios. We are more confident that this kind of situation will happen, but the other one still has support. It's still possible, depending on how tonight's weather plays out in the mid-Atlantic. So this is the UK model. Strong winds, a lot of rainfall across many parts of the UK, and some hill snow in the north. But if I toggle on the European computer model for the same time, just take that off for a sec, you can see an area of low pressure out here, nothing over the UK.
And notice the isobars are nothing like as closely packed, so it wouldn't be as windy in this situation as well. It'll still bring a wet and windy spell, and it's not a million miles on it. It's still an area of low pressure close to the UK. You know, 25 years ago, you'd think that was pretty accurate, but nowadays that is quite a big difference.
Yeah,
at this kind of timescale.
And another thing that's interesting here is that low for both models is the same. That is. And these isobars virtually are identical all around the boundaries. It's just this little bit in the middle over the UK, which is very uncertain. And that's why we can say we've got more confidence about the weekend's weather, because it's that low, which is identical in all the different computer models. It's fairly straightforward. It's a well-developed low at this stage, and so we can track it across the Atlantic quite easy. It's this one that's spinning up really quickly in the next 24 hours, coming our way, or not, as the case may be. Might be another area a small area of low pressure that gets caught up in the jet stream and sent our way. So big uncertainty for tomorrow night.
Absolutely fascinating, really is fascinating. And this is the kind of situation as well that we'll learn from, and there'll be studies done afterwards to analyse the situation, which model was better, which model wasn't, and maybe the computer models will get better as a result of this.
I mean, if you were to take, for example, the computer model for the UK, and then it's this sort of thing for tomorrow night. So this is the more likely scenario. Wet and windy weather moving in, and that rain bumping into cold air across northern Britain. It's cooling down through the night, and you've got hill snow, most likely at the moment above 250 metres. Northern England into southern and then eventually central Scotland. Now the EC wouldn't have the strong winds as such. It would still have rainfall and potential for snowfall in mainly upland areas again, but
you want to think about snowfall. Of course, it's actually crucial on timings. It's got the European model is that much slower with it, that it probably come in through the day, by which time everything's had time to warm up a little bit as well. So it's those timings can be, 6 hours difference can be between the difference between the wet weather is falling into air that is only 1 or 2 degrees above freezing, and so could fall as snow, or whether it's falling into air that is 5 or 6 degrees and is always going to be rain. So that's another. Again, it's just these subtle differences. The difference between 6 hours can make a big difference. But we are a bit concerned about the strength of the winds, because they could be pretty lively. So this morning, the Met Office have issued a yellow warning for the potential for strong gusts of winds across parts of Wales, the Midlands and northern England. But there is a lot to play for, so make sure you stay tuned to the forecasts. As Aidan says, we should know a lot more by the end of today.
Yeah. It'll be fascinating to see what happens out
it will be.
in the Atlantic.
There's a lot of excitement.
Seeing a low pressure being born. It's, you think, it should be straightforward looking at tomorrow night, but this low pressure with all the winds and the rainfall and the hill snow doesn't even exist right now. So it's nothing.
Nothing but a twinkle in an eye. Anyway, let's go and see if there's any more questions coming in. Claire.
Hello there, Linda Garton on Facebook. My sister is travelling from the Isle of Man to Liverpool by ferry on Friday. So Friday at the moment looks like a transient area of high pressure just coming across. Again, timings are going to be a little bit uncertain right now, but certainly the winds will slowly ease for a time before the weekend becomes lively again. However, there is a lag time in sea states, so it's very, very rough at the moment, and it will continue to be. So expect some choppy seas, but it should ease just a little bit. Who's doing the 10-day trend? Well, interesting times for the 10-day trend, because as the boys are saying, more confidence perhaps for next week than this week, and it's Aidan doing the 10-day trend tomorrow, so watch this space. And more questions coming in about snow, obviously. The midterm forecast, which the Met Office issues every month for the season and beyond, is suggesting things could settle down as we head through January into February. There's a likelihood, that's a trend rather than a forecast, but yes, we've seen horrendous amounts of rain over the last 6 months or so. On the podcast, which comes out on Thursday, Met Office podcast, Weather Snap, we'll be talking to a farmer about the effect on the land across Britain, particularly with the floods, but certainly perhaps a glimmer of hope on the horizon for some drier skies. Thank you for all your questions coming in. It's great to be back, isn't it, boys? It really is.
It is great to be back. A couple of really good questions. So Katie Chester on Facebook, set fire to stop fire. How does that work? Because that's what we were talking about earlier about in Australia. They don't set fire to the fire. They burn a bit of land ahead of the fire. So they try and plan how the fire is spreading. And if they burn a bit of land, but it stops the fuel. That land is then burnt, and the fire then can't continue over that fire. So it's fresh ground that the fire wants to burn across and will continue to. So they burn a little bit ahead of it, and that does then ideally stop it, but certainly slow it down, because there's nothing left for the fire to burn, so it doesn't feed off it. So that's how that works. A good question from Callum Kent. Can pyrocumulonimbus clouds produce tornadoes? Well, I would have thought so. I'm not an expert on that, but I can't see a reason why not.
Firenados, I think.
Firenados are slightly different because they're generated by the heat often, and then you get the spiral within them. But actually, an actual tornado, why not? If it's a cumulonimbus cloud, it could do. But that's a really interesting question. We could maybe ask around the office if there's some cumulonimbus experts or pyrocumulonimbus experts.
And somebody talking about the weather in Singapore. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of flooding across Indonesia. Jakarta having some horrific flooding there. 66 people already have lost their lives due to the flooding over the last few weeks there, and more heavy rain on the way for Singapore and that whole region. Although it looked like last week was the peak of the very intense rainfall, where I think there was 400 millimetres in a day, which is a monthly figure generally.
The record January figure for Jakarta is actually close to 400. So they're close to their record January rainfall in just one day. One of the reasons for that, warming seas around Australia, and that's actually also been sparked by the southerly winds ahead of that tropical cyclone Blake that we saw earlier, pushing northwards. They've had northerly winds coming south, and where those two clash together, there's been an increase in rainfall. And something called the MJO, which is another area of research you could do for an MSc, the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, also been intense over that part of the world. But I was speaking to Paul Hutchin on the Global Guidance Unit earlier today, and that, although it will be pretty bad for the next few days, does look like easing as we go into the weekend.
And a final question from Samuel Southall before I head back to the boys. Will the low be named on Thursday? Well, that's the million-dollar question, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what we've been talking about, the uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about the position of that low, and we'll have more information later on. Certainly if the European model comes in, or if the UK model backs up the European model, then it seems unlikely because the winds won't be that severe. But if it intensifies more, then there is the potential for that. So we won't know till later today. So again, it is stay tuned, because it could be pretty nasty.
Yeah, and we'll have more on that later today with our routine forecasts, and tomorrow morning, of course.
Make sure you're following us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well.
So a quick look at the weekend, which, as we mentioned, is looking, well, a bit more straightforward, not necessarily good weather, but more straightforward weather to forecast compared to Wednesday night and Thursday. This is Thursday's low. No matter where it ends up, it's out of the way for Friday, and Friday's a break in between weather systems, so it's a ridge of high pressure, a chilly start in many places, before quite quickly the next low moves up towards Iceland, and we've had a few deep lows during the past week. Push into Iceland, some very strong winds here, some very rough weather, and you can see how the depth of that low, although it's quite far away from the UK, it still leads to tight isobars and strong winds for many parts of Britain, especially in the northwest. So wind strengthening through Friday in the northwest, and then the rainfall arrives, and we can expect another spell of very wet weather Friday night into Saturday for northwestern areas, especially again Western Scotland, Cumbria, where the rainfall, some small amount of uncertainty in terms of the exact distribution of the wettest weather, but it's likely to be northwestern hills that see some very soggy conditions to start off the weekend. Breezy everywhere, a lot of cloud cover, so not a cold start to Saturday, a mild start for all parts. And then the trend through the weekend is for that rain to eventually relent from the northwest, drift southeastwards through Saturday night, and eventually clear off the scene for the start of Sunday, allowing colder weather to arrive from the northwest.
And changing a bit, isn't it, over the course of the weekend, and it's consistent with this fairly active jet stream that's still across the UK or close to the UK and dominating, bringing spells of wet weather. Brief interludes of colder weather, but no prolonged spells of cold weather expected as we go into next week. Again, you'll be covering this on the 10-day trend. There's a hint of it settling down next week, but not. The snowmantics will be getting disappointing. Yeah,
for the next month or so, there's no signs of any proper cold weather, just these temporary incursions of sort of northwesterly winds and wintry showers over northern hills. Next week, the start of next week, looks like a repeat of the weekend. We've got more wet weather in the northwest, strong winds, mild, sweeping through, wintry showers follow. But there are some hints from some of the longer range models that from mid-month onwards, we'll see high pressure build over the continent. Close to the southeast of the UK. That again isn't indicative of particularly cold wintry weather, because we'd have winds coming up from the south generally, but it could settle things down more widely.
Don't give away all your 10-day trends secrets.
It'll change by tomorrow.
I want people to tune in tomorrow. Speaking of 10-day trends, let's go to the 10-year trend, shall we? We've got some statistics that the Met Office published last week. We talked about them quite a bit last week. UK statistics for the last decade, from 2010 up to the end of 2019. It was the second warmest decade on record, slightly cooler than the previous decade, but the last 2 decades have been the warmest on record, so records going back over 100 years, and obviously completely consistent with what we expect from climate change. And one of the key things actually about the last decade, and again consistent with what you'd expect from climate change, you expect more extremes. A lot of the computer models just saying the weather is going to get more extreme, and we've seen over the past decade recorded 8 high temperature extremes, whereas we've only seen 1 low temperature extreme, and that was Beast from the East in March 2018. But these are individual records, monthly records that were broken. We saw 8 of them broken throughout the decade. Pretty unusual and incredible.
4 out of 8 last year.
4 of them out of last year. That December one has still not been verified. I don't think it's been fully verified. No. Right at the end of the month, that record. So just again, just going to show that warm extremes, we're seeing more of them. There'll still be cold days, there'll still be cold times, there'll still be cold years. This is to put it into context of how those records have been broken over. So this is, again, the orange is warm, high temperature records that are broken, blue is low. You can see that trend. There's a trend on the up there for those reds, and the downward slope for those low. You still get cold extremes, you still get cold years. 2010, we talked about it earlier with the snowfall, was a cold year, and that actually skewed the whole decade and made it slightly cooler than the previous decades. But you still get cold years, but the warmer ones are more frequent and the more extreme, and the colder ones becoming.
And the UK is just a small country, so we have highly variable weather. 2010 may have been a cold year, and the last decade may have been slightly colder because of that compared to the previous decade. But for the Earth as a whole, for the whole globe, the last 5 years have been the warmest 5 years on record, and you can see that it's making, well, the weather more extreme, but in a warm direction.
There'll be more stats, no doubt, throughout this month. The fully verified global temperature stats should be out sometime during January as well. So make sure you are staying tuned to the Met Office for the very latest on climate and weather. Best way to do that is to, of course, follow us across all the social medias. Any more questions coming in, Claire?
Another question from Chris A on YouTube. Can snow form when a weather system is coming up from the south as opposed to coming down from the north? And actually, absolutely it can when it clashes with colder air, like Storm Emma in the Beast from the East. That was a storm which developed across Iberia, pushed northwards, hit the cold air, and we saw a lot of snow and also freezing rain. So it doesn't really matter where the weather is coming from, it just depends on what it hits. If it hits very cold air, then yes, certainly this time of year it easily turns to snow.
Excellent. One final RYEGI on YouTube asks, can you share the 10 hectopascals stratospheric charts for the next 10 days? Want to know if there's anything SSW. Well, the reason we're not showing them, it kind of tells you the story. There is no SSW. We will be first to let you know if the stratosphere is suddenly warming or showing signs of it. At the moment, there's no real signs of that happening.
Yeah, the winds surrounding the stratospheric polar vortex at the moment are much stronger than average, which may in part explain why the weather across the the UK is so westerly, so turbulent, so...
Excellent. Thank you very, very much for all your questions. Do please get involved. Give us the thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Share this with your friends as well. Keep the questions coming in. As I say, even if you're not watching this live, we still go through the questions. And maybe you come up with topics, suggestions that we can cover on other programs. But for now, that's all. So thank you very much for watching. See you next week.